Hello everyone, this is Kingrats here. Welcome back to the channel, guys. And today I want to discuss the NHL Draft Lottery for 2025, which is going to be coming up on this Monday, May 5th. And in this video, I just wanted to discuss the Draft Lottery going into it and basically my thoughts and a little bit of discussion. And I also wanted to say that I did an experiment on the Draft Lottery using a simulator and essentially just seeing what we could most likely expect coming out of this Draft Lottery. So I will be discussing that. Of course, if you don't really know the Draft Lottery, don't be worried because I will be explaining the basic rules when it comes to the NHL's Draft Lottery system, so that you can pick up early in this video. After that, I will then go through my simulation and how things went based on my data, and then at the end of the video, I'll then be discussing my own predictions as to what I expect is probably going to happen this time around for the NHL. So, with all that being said, hope you enjoy, sit back, and let's get into it. Okay, so starting with the basic rules, because the NHL's draft lottery system is a little bit more sophisticated compared to other sports leagues, like for example the NBA, and mainly this is done so that way the NHL can support the teams that are rebuilding and are in the bottom of the standings and eventually rise through the ranks. And that's pretty much how the NHL system has been for at least a while now. So the draft system is essentially involving the top 16 teams that essentially did not make the playoffs in the NHL season, and they all have a set of odds for potentially winning the draft lottery. In which case, the order based on according to the NHL site, which I'm reading here, the odds for the 16 teams are based on the inverse order of the regular season standings. So basically, the worse you are, then the higher you are in the draft lottery. So, for example, the San Jose Sharks, who had the worst record in the NHL this season, they have the best odds in the draft lottery because they are basically number one on that list. Involving the rules, as I mentioned, in order to help the rebuilding clubs at the bottom of the standings, only the top 11 teams in the NHL can win the first overall pick. So essentially, if you are between places 12 and 16, for example, you basically cannot win the first overall pick. However, any team in the draft lottery, you can only jump as high as 10 spots from your original position. So technically, a team that's 12th could still win the second overall pick, basically, right? And the draft lottery runs in two phases. So really only the top two picks are determined in the draft lottery, in which that's the first phase of the lottery figures out who picks number one, and then the second phase determines who picks number two. And then after that, once all the other teams have been determined, they are then going to be slotted in by the order of their finish in the standings. So after 1 and 2, whichever those teams may be, it's then in the order of basically who was the worst in the standings. And so essentially, if you didn't get 1 and 2, the worse you finished the regular season, then the closer you are to basically number 3 or right at number 3. Looking at the odds, San Jose, of course, who finished worst in the NHL, they have the best odds in the draft lottery this year at I think 18.5%. Following them would be the Chicago Blackhawks, and then the Nashville Predators, who round out the top three, Philadelphia, Boston, and so on and so forth. So I hope I can clarify the rules here based on my explanation and helping you out. So now let's cut to the fun stuff in the simulations. So I used Tankathon to run my simulations. I basically simulated the NHL's draft lottery using the existing odds 40 times, and I tallied who finished first, second, and third in the draft order through the lottery, and also who was the biggest riser and the biggest faller in the draft lottery. Now, of course, the thing is that I didn't entirely include some of this data only because there were a lot of instances where a lot of teams basically had the same rise or the same fall, and it was relatively consistent, I noticed, across most of the simulations. So let's go through the data here as I bring up my trusty notebook. So starting off, if you look at the top three teams in particular with the best odds, so that would be San Jose, Chicago, and Nashville. Collectively, they won the first overall pick most of the time. The Sharks won the first overall pick 10 times out of the 40 simulations. Chicago only won it 3 times, while Nashville won it 7 times, which, kind of interesting. And most of the time for these three teams, they at least finished top 3. San Jose in particular was very much going to be finishing top 3. They finished 22 times in the simulation at 3rd overall, Chicago 13 times, and Nashville 5 times. Of course, San Jose, Chicago, and Nashville were also the biggest fallers in my simulations, but that was kind of obvious because whenever there was a team that surprisingly won the first overall pick or whatnot, usually Chicago and San Jose were the teams that dropped the most, and that was pretty straightforward, as you could tell from there. Now, there are some interesting things I'd like to point out. Boston, in particular, was the biggest team to land the first overall pick outside of the top 3, as they won it a grand total of 7 times. They also had at least 1 second overall selection in my simulations. Outside of them, everybody else basically had somewhere between 1 to 3 selections, but of course, minus Detroit, Columbus, Utah, Vancouver, and Calgary, who did not receive 1 first overall selection. If anything, when it comes to the teams that were in the bottom of the simulations, Detroit got the second overall pick once, and Columbus landed number 3 only once. But also, you have to keep in mind, based on my results, that Utah, Vancouver, and Calgary at least once in the simulation got the biggest rise, in which they all got at least 10 spots up in the draft order. I think the highest they got was basically 4th, 5th, and 6th, and that was pretty much the closest they can get. But yeah, for those 3 teams, that's pretty much what you can get out of them. Other than that, other teams like Philadelphia, Seattle, Buffalo, they had some success at winning the draft lottery, but not very much. Philadelphia was on a few occasions the biggest riser. They rose the most, at least 5 times out of all the teams, and usually they were winning somewhere around the second overall pick if they ever rose up in the draft order. Some surprise teams did happen. Notably, Anaheim had probably the biggest luck out of all of the long shots to win the draft lottery. In my simulations, they won the draft lottery 3 times, going number 1, and they had second overall at least 5 times. And usually this involved them at least jumping up 6 spots in the draft order in order to get these positions. Pittsburgh also had a little bit of luck. They landed the first overall pick twice and the second overall pick 3 times. And then New York, both New York teams, the Rangers and the Islanders, collectively won the first overall pick 3 times. So it's technically not entirely impossible for a long shot selection to happen here, so there is a little bit of hope for like the New York teams and Pittsburgh and Anaheim to maybe jump up high in the standings, but of course that's tough to do because the odds are incredibly stacked against them. So what do we look at all these standings, like what's really probably going to happen here? Well, for one, the math already says that San Jose, Chicago, and Nashville are probably the most likely going to have success in this draft lottery, and they're also very well secured for landing at least in the top 3. It was very rare for me to see these guys fall out of the top 3, and considering the odds are very much helping them out, especially with the rule of like, oh, you can only jump 10 places and all that, I'm going to expect that it's going to be one of those 3 clubs that probably wins first overall. Now, considering that this draft year is a little bit lighter, but does have some balanced talents in guys like Matthew Schaefer and James Higgins, Porter Martone, etc., that it's likely that maybe a big market takes advantage of this. I mean, there was some argument that in the Connor Bedard sweepstakes that there was maybe some tampering by the NHL in order for Bedard to go to a big market team, and that being Chicago. But then last year we saw Macklin Celebrini go to San Jose, so not entirely sure. I would say the Sharks maybe just win this again, considering that they do have the best odds, and not trying to throw any bias or shade here, but I do think that most likely we're going to see a relatively consistent draft order. Probably not much changes coming here. I don't really expect a team outside of the top 5 to significantly move up, so I'm just going to say that we probably get the typical order of San Jose, Chicago, and Nashville, 1, 2, 3, just like that. And if anything else does happen, then I'll be very much surprised. But yeah, that's all I'm really going to say here. So let me know what you think. What do you think is going to happen in the draft lottery? Who are you rooting for, actually? And yeah, if you enjoy this type of content, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content if you like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.